Good day, everybody. Randy Franklin Smith here, and today we're talking about how to preempt Mimikatz attacks and related credential artifact attacks on privileged accounts, and we'll look at a couple different ways to do that. The bottom line is we have to just isolate the passwords of privileged accounts from systems that are vulnerable in the first place, and it's going to be a great webinar. It's very technical and very practical, and you're going to see some awesome technology from Beyond Trust by Martin. Martin Kennard is with me here, and Martin, thanks for making today's real training for free possible, and look forward to getting your input on the stuff I talked about today.
Great to be with you.
And there's one question I want to ask you folks real quick here, and that is, what stage are you at with this whole issue of privileged accounts? I'll give you just a couple of seconds to talk about that, and then we'll move along. We've got about a quarter voting. It's still going. We're about 50%. I usually cut it off. We usually get up to about 65% or so, so just about finished. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. I appreciate that. That's valuable feedback for us. All right, so make sure you can still see my screen. There we go. So here's kind of the agenda that we're going to follow. First of all, I'm going to talk about these credential artifact attacks that have largely been made practical and feasible by Mimikatz and all of the various implementations by other folks with Mimikatz. And then what we're really going to focus on are the mitigations, and there's two ways to defend against Mimikatz type attacks, Martin. One is to clean up the mess left behind before Mimikatz attackers have a chance to take advantage of those artifacts, and that's what lots of times people talk about and focus on. Or the other thing is, at least with our privileged accounts, to just prevent the mess from being made in the first place of credential artifacts. Do you follow me?
No, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just rather than get to the point where the artifacts are there in the first place, or just make sure you don't get the artifacts at all. You know, it's much better to, much easier.
And there's really just two ways you can do that. One is with a parallel workstation environment, and the other is with I don't want to just say privileged session management. It needs to be what I define as a clean privileged session management that also includes human presence two-factor. So I'm going to drill down into both of those. The other thing that we're going to talk about is another thing that separates privileged session management technology, and that is whether or not it's a protocol level proxy. So really good stuff coming. Now, let's first of all just talk about how these artifact attacks, credential artifact attacks, work. And when I talk about artifacts, one of the most common ones is the password hash, and you know, the whole pass the hash attack that was made so easy with Mimikatz. But that's only one type of artifact. One of the fundamentals to understand is that interactive logons are far more messy in terms of leaving around credential artifacts than network logons. So what is the difference? When you walk up to the keyboard and screen of a computer and log on, or when you remote desktop into that computer, that's an interactive logon. When you, from your workstation, reach out and access another server non-interactively, like through computer management or through you know, a variety of remote, like RSAT tools, then that's generally a network logon, which just in general leaves behind little to no artifacts at all. So in all of these discussions, you will see the issue coming up about whether or not the user logged on interactively to a computer or not. And that's the problem. When you log on to some workstation out there with a privileged account, or when you enter that password regardless of any way, shape, or form, that's where we are vulnerable. We're not so vulnerable if we're connecting to a server over the network with that password, at least in terms of what's left on that server. Now again, if you've entered that password, or if that password has in any way touched the workstation, that's where our vulnerabilities come up for a couple reasons. First of all, Windows is just messy with interactive logons, with creating credential artifacts, including the hash in memory, but other things too. Second of all, workstations are just very, very, very vulnerable, and there's just no way to get around that. And we'll talk about workstations more here in a little bit. So the most common thing, the most common attack with Mimikatz and these credential artifacts is, of course, pass the hash. And in this case, what happens is the user logs on interactively at the Windows computer, LSASS, that's the Local Security Authority System Service, gets that password, and with some versions of Windows, it takes the clear text password that the user entered, and it encrypts it and stores it in memory. And that is to support the WDigest security support provider. Now, in more recent versions of Windows, that's disabled by default. But we've got a ton of Windows 7 computers out there that are doing this by default, Martin, and they're going to be supported until like 2020.
Yeah, and that's a real problem. Yeah, definitely.
But even if that's turned off, you still have the hash in memory, and that's what Mimikatz goes after. That's what people normally use. Is we don't even need the clear text password. We can get the hash, and then we can use a pass the hash technique to gain access to other computers on the network with that hash. And so those are two credential artifacts right there, but there's others. There's ways that we can use Kerberos tickets. There is a degree of risk with cached credentials of domain accounts logging onto systems. And then, of course, there's saved credentials in Windows itself and then with internet browsers. If Mimikatz can't get it, there's other tools like Kane and so on that can. And there's just no way around it because, as you'll see, one of the requirements here, one of the prerequisites, is that in addition to having bad guy code running on the computer, we also have admin authority. The malware has to have gotten privileged authority to the computer for all of these things. And the point is, if you can, if you have privileged access to a computer, then you can do anything on that computer. It's one of the so-called immutable laws of computer security. Now, more recent versions of Windows, like with Windows 10, it has Credential Guard, which, depending upon the addition of Windows you've got and which vendor you bought it from, and if everything is enabled correctly, if the BIOS is correct, a secure boot is enabled, and so on, then there are new things like Credential Guard where the LSASS process is run in a separate virtual machine. But none of us, I doubt, organization-wide are completely Windows 10, and how many people have actually verified that Credential Guard is actually active? So yes, before anybody brings it up, the more recent the version of Windows, the more defense it has against a lot of these credential artifact attacks. But what I want to explore is, instead of sticking my finger in each hole in the dam holding back the water every time a leak is sprung, every time people find another credential artifact method, how can we just prevent the attacks, preempt them altogether? That's what we're focusing on today. So I'm not going to be spending time on, okay, how do you disable plain text passwords being stored for WDigest? How do we implement restricted admin mode for remote desktop? How do we implement Credential Guard? What are the hardware? See, each one of those, just addresses a single credential artifact risk, and it's like plugging holes in Swiss cheese, if you want another metaphor. But that's kind of what I'm focusing on today. How can we just circumvent this whole problem, at least in terms of our privileged accounts? We can't do this for every account in Windows or in an organization, I should say, but we certainly can for privileged accounts. And by the way, Martin, you might want to just step in here too. I'd like your thoughts on it. Privileged accounts don't always mean IT workers. They may also be user accounts associated with very high-value operations or high-risk operations in the user community, like people doing wire transfer, initiating wire transfers and stuff like that. Martin, are you seeing companies do privileged session management for end users at all?
They are, but I mean, it also falls into things. If you think of accounts that are, we traditionally think of, logging onto a server, and protecting the admin account. But if you think of intellectual property and damage that could get done, you also have to consider things. What about web pages? What about the corporate Facebook site? What about the Twitter account? You look at the amount of damage that's been done, to sites like that, for particular companies. So it's really, there's a lot of different areas, and obviously the definition of importance is going to sort of relate to that company. But you're absolutely right. It's not just accounts. It's anything that a user could do that could potentially, damage an organization using credentials.
Indeed. And so I found a really good quote from Sands that backs up what I'm saying here. It's in bold. The most effective protection is to just avoid interactive logons to any untrusted hosts. So that's what we're focusing on today. Oh, and by the way, these sophisticated artifact attacks are not even that big of a deal. They are useful for grabbing credentials of people that have logged on before the malware became extant and active on that system. But if malware, once malware is running, does it even need to bother with pass the hash and that other stuff? Can it just use keystroke logging to get the clear text password? A lot of times we get distracted by these complicated, more intriguing, sophisticated attacks, and really keystroke logging. Once the malware is there, we can grab every password the user enters from that point on without doing anything that sophisticated.
Yeah, actually, just one thing to add there, Randy, as well is, we always, we're sort of thinking about, okay, well, what can, somebody do if they compromise the system? But the fact is, if a user is doing an interactive login, it means that they know what the password is. So that means that there's some exposure. So, even if you think of a user could write that password down, somewhere, they could, type it into a spreadsheet, they could put it somewhere else. Interactive logins, there's obviously an element, where you have artifacts on the system, but just the pure fact that it's interactive means that there's, that password's been exposed for, a length of time.
Well, that is very important, and that is a whole nother host of risks, which is, the problem with having humans know privileged account passwords at all. Just they're having knowledge of it. That opens us up to negligence and to disgruntled privileged admins, and there's a whole lot of risk associated with both of those. So what we're looking at today will also address those, at least in terms of one of the options that I show you, and that is clean privileged session management with human presence. Okay, so just to be clear, what are the requirements here? There's a few things. We need an endpoint that gets compromised by malware. So we have to have some malware running on that endpoint. And the attacker has to get privileged authority, has to get admin authority to that local computer. If the end user already has if the user of that laptop, assuming it's a laptop, has admin authority, then any malware running on there as that user is obviously going to have that already. So that's oftentimes not very difficult. And then, of course, there's privileged escalation attacks. Then the other thing is, at some point in time, an admin needs to have logged on either to the Windows console of that computer, or maybe he's logged on with an everyday unprivileged account, but later enters his credentials through some other remote administration tool to access some other server on the network. But the key point is he's logged on there at that computer and entered in the credentials, the password of the privileged account in question. Now, sequence is not important here. The order that you see this in has no bearing. This can, I think that's a key point. The admin could have logged on in the past, and then later, subsequent to that on the timeline, the malware starts running and gains admin authority. That's why we call these artifact attacks, credential artifact attacks. And I just think that's a key point. Martin, any quick comments on that? It's not that the malware can steal passwords from the point in time going forward that it becomes active. It can go back in time and get credentials depending on who has logged on in the past.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, if you have anything that's susceptible to malware, then, as you said, there's a whole host of stuff that could be harvested. Some of it may have expired, some of it may still be active, but either way, it's forwards and backwards. I mean, it does affect you.
Okay, so here's some examples of what we're talking about that illustrate this. Example number one: an admin logs onto an endpoint with a privileged account. Later, that endpoint is compromised by malware that harvests credential artifacts from memory or the registry. Or scenario number two: on some endpoint, the admin remotely logs on to another system with a privileged account. Later, the malware harvests credential artifacts left behind. Or maybe the endpoint is already compromised. The admin logs on locally and then accesses another system with a privileged account. The malware steals the password as it's typed or from derived credential artifacts left behind in memory or the registry. And there's just many, many ways to do this. And see, Dan asked the question, is this including prior to the most recent reboot? Dan, that's the problem. It all depends on exactly which artifact you're talking about. Some artifacts live in memory and rebooting the computer gets rid of them. Other ones stay on disk. And in today's webinar, I'm not getting into all those details. I'm looking at how to have a single solution and process that preempts all of these artifacts from being stored in the first place.
Well, the other thing to remember there as well is servers, which are predominantly the targets of hackers, are very rarely rebooted. So it's not like desktops where you are potentially clearing down caches and things. Servers are very prime targets, simply because they're always on.
That is true. Although I'm interested in your comments about this next slide. It's actually a good segue into this, Martin, and that is that I'm saying that today's discussion is primarily about workstations. In that, servers, we have to allow people to log on. There has to be, what am I trying to say, privileged interactive logons at servers. There's a lot of admin type things that can only be done through a remote desktop session unless you're an absolute PowerShell wizard. But one of the big things we're talking about here is also not changing the way admins do their work, right? And so a lot of admins, to get anything done, they say, look, I need to build a remote desktop into this server. So that is one of the other cool things, though, of what PSM can do while we're at it, and that really also gets into privileged account management, is resetting the password, because the server, like you said, isn't going to be rebooted. That hash is going to stay in memory. But if, when we're done using the account, one of the other key pieces of PAM is to reset the password of the account, right, Martin? So that does address even that.
No, that's right, because like you said, I mean, the standard use case is someone's going to RDP remotely onto a host, but you're always going to get instances where, like I say, interactive, somebody knows what the credentials are, they got a crash cart, they go into the data center, they're logging directly onto a server. Again, it doesn't happen often, but it can happen. Plus also, you may actually have somebody that RDPs from a workstation to a member server, then they RDP from that server to another server. So, potentially, I mean, in all of these places, there are bits and pieces left over. So there's definitely a multi-pronged approach, where rotation means that, if something does get compromised, then, you're reducing the lifetime of that, and the exposure risk. And then obviously then, when it comes to workstation, that's where, we need to remove the interactive part.
Yeah, and so the majority of these attacks begin and get the most mileage out of the workstation, whether it's an end user workstation that an admin has logged onto at some point, or it's actually the admin's workstation. So that's why I'm saying a lot of this risk is about workstations. Now, the way to address this is basically restating what the SANS quote already said, and that is, bottom line, you can never allow the password of a privileged account to touch a workstation that is or may be compromised now or in the future. Now that's pretty wide open, right? And how many workstations can you really say are not vulnerable to being compromised? Workstations are the bane of security because, first of all, we're doing interactive things. Interactive activity is just way more prone to security problems in the first place, number one. Number two, workstations are where we want to browse the web, read email, and just open up files of any type, like even image files, anything, video files that have been downloaded from the web. And short of setting up a completely parallel workstation environment, workstations are vulnerable. And then there's other reasons why as well. And so there's two ways then to do this. One, we give, everybody who does any kind of privileged work gets two workstations, two laptops. One of them is what they use for their end user activity, for browsing the web, really doing anything at all except for operations requiring admin authority. So that first end user type laptop, or we could call it the dirty laptop, is really used for everything. It's not about using it for dangerous activities. It's about using it for everything except those operations that truly require admin authority. And that's where the other clean, hardened laptop comes into play. And this is nothing new, right? We've been talking about, giving admins two laptops for a long time. It's never a good solution for all kinds of reasons. I mean, first of all, carrying around two devices is one problem. Second of all, admins hate it. Third, and they resist. Third, it's easy to get mixed up. And if you try doing it the virtual machine way, where your clean laptop hosts a dirty virtual machine guest, then it's easy to get mixed up and do the wrong thing, or perform a dangerous operation in the clean PC, basically. So there's just gobs and gobs of problems with that. Now, here is the alternative. And plus, the other thing with the parallel workstation environment, Martin, is what you brought out. And that is that the human still knows the password. And so we still have all the problems associated with that.
Yep, no, that's correct.
Okay. Let's see here. Just keeping an eye on some of the questions. Rami asks, does RDPing into a server with administrative privilege, does that leave artifacts on the workstation if I'm using a regular user account on the workstation? So, Rami, here's the vulnerability there. You're on a workstation, you RDP into a server with admin privileges. Okay, your workstation, you need to assume it's compromised, that it has malware running that is recording your keystrokes. Okay, so there's the problem there. Second of all, are artifacts left on the server you're RDPing into? It depends upon the version of Windows and whether or not you're using restricted admin authority and what you do once you're logged into that server. Can't make any blanket statements on that. So again, that's why we're looking at ways today to just completely circumvent that whole thing. Jonathan, just to clarify, does this include entering an admin credential on a workstation in a secure desktop account escalation? Oh yeah, that doesn't, if you're talking about user account control, there's no protection there with the stuff that we're talking about today. Okay, now, what's the alternative to having two workstations? Or by the way, if you still want to have two workstations, you can, but you get all this other mitigation and control that we're talking about, including the fact that the admin does not know the password of these privileged accounts. And that's also super important when it comes to shared accounts or built-in accounts like administrator and root. We never want multiple people to share an account because of all the problems associated with that. So that's why the parallel workstation thing is, to me, it's like Red Forest. It's like, does it improve your security? Absolutely. Is it comprehensive? By no means. Is it convenient? By no means. Is it a huge impact and disruptive? By all means. So Martin, I'll talk about Red Forest more, but I kind of lump both of those together. Is Red Forest strong technically? Yes. Is parallel workstations strong technically? Yes, but they're not comprehensive, they're not simple or convenient, and they're really heavy in terms of complexity and in disruption. Martin?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said for keeping things simple. I mean, I think, very often, organizations tend to over-engineer because, they want to have some clear separation. I mean, I know of many organizations that do have two systems, especially in the telecommunications world where, you have your sort of inside network that's dealing with your routers, your switches, and then you can only access them from particular workstations, and then you have your other one that's only connected to the outside. Sometimes it's good to have that physical separation, but really, these days now with the tools that are available, it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut, in my opinion.
Yeah. Jeremy shared a link of a Microsoft article on securing privileged access workstations, and I just shared that with everybody. He brings up another good point, is that these workstations need to be hardened and managed centrally, and maintained at a very high level of security, and so that's some additional overhead there. Now, so what's the alternative? The alternative is privileged account management and privileged session management. And not just any privileged account management, privileged session management. As with everything in security, the devil is in the details. So here are my two big requirements, and I'm going to pencil in a third one. Number one, the password of the privileged account is not revealed to the workstation in any way, shape, or form. And you've really got to do your homework because some PAM PSM systems don't show the password to the user, but the password, the bits, the characters of the password are indeed traveling from the privileged session management system to the workstation in question and then back out to the target system. So number one, password isolation is the easiest way to describe that. Number two, human presence two-factor requirement. Now, what do I mean by human presence? I mean that the second factor authentication requires an action by the human that cannot be faked by malware running on the workstation. Okay, so let me repeat that again. And well, let me give you an example. Maybe you use Duo authentication or anything else that sends a push notification to your smartphone, and there you have to say, yes, I approve. That is a human presence second factor of authentication. Here's another one. A one-time password hard token or soft token on a smartphone. That requires the human to read that 6-digit number and enter it in, and it's out of band from the workstation involved. So that's what I'm talking about with human presence. The third requirement that I'm going to pencil in here is that it's protocol level. I'll explain more about that later, but the PAM PSM system, if it's going to be non-intrusive and not change the way admins work, it needs to be protocol level of, and by that I mean the remote desktop, the remote administration protocol used, and typically that's Secure Shell, SSH, or else it's RDP. So more coming on that one. Oh, just a little more drill down on the first alternative. I thought I was done with it, but the whole parallel admin thing, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. You know, there's a lot involved. It needs to be secure boot, it needs to be encrypted disk. We need to be severely limited with the software installed, severely limited with usage restrictions on that system, inbound connections denied, and it goes on and on from there. You can check out that link that we shared. So the obvious drawbacks: difficult to enforce restrictions, central management, very inconvenient for admins, and it doesn't address all the risks that we're talking about today. So here's what happens with a PSM PAM solution with human presence that we've defined as the way to provide a comprehensive way to protect privileged accounts and especially preempt Mimikatz style attacks. So what we have is a privileged session management system, we'll call it appliance, between the admin's workstation and the server. And the key thing here is the admin, the human, and the admin's workstation, whether it's a clean workstation or a dirty workstation, just does not directly touch the server in question. And the password is not known or revealed to either the admin or the admin's computer. So that means when the admin wants to initiate a session to the server down here with a privileged account, the admin is going to authenticate to the privileged session management system using personal credentials of that admin. Then indicate the server that he wants to access and the account with which he wants to access that server, and thus get a remote session, whether it's remote desktop or secure shell, down here to the server. Now, are we talking about making the admin go to a portal and enter all of this in and completely change the way he normally works? With some PAM solutions, PSM solutions, that is what happens. But Martin, admins resist that, right? Because we're totally changing how they work. We're even taking away their favorite remote administration tools.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things, I mean, where when it comes to administration, administrators are they know what they like. You know, they're used to using tools in a certain way. They're very protective about their environment, their workflow processes. And, you know, oftentimes if you put something in that's going to fundamentally change it, then you'll find that users start to push back against it. They'll start to use backdoors. They'll look to see, are there other ways, you know, that they can go back to using their existing tools. So it's, you know, with PAM, it's not just about the tools, but it's about the adoption as well. You have to have buy-in. You've got to make it functionally useful, and people need to be able to see this as an enabler, not a disabler.
And so that's where that third requirement comes in, that it be a protocol level privileged session management technology. What that means then is if the admin is accustomed to using PuTTY or remote desktop manager by, I can't remember the name of the company, but we use it. Yeah, Devolutions. We're not taking that away. They continue to use it. The only thing we change, as you'll see when Martin takes over, is we just add a little bit of information to the server address. Instead of saying, I want to talk to the server down here, I basically say, I want to open up an RDP session to this appliance / this server, more or less. But nothing else changes with the admin experience, yet now we've got a huge amount of security mitigation here. The password never is known by the admin, so he can't mess it up either through negligence or maliciousness. The workstation never knows or sees the password, so no matter what bad guy software is running on that workstation, it's not going to get the password. Now, if you're thinking closely, you might say, hey, but couldn't it initiate a session to the privileged management server? Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the human presence comes in. Let me skip down. Yeah, I'll come back to that. But with the human presence, then even if there is bad guy software running here on the workstation, as you'll see in a few slides, we're still covered. And that's why I'm stressing the human presence thing. And so that addresses your question, Artem. Stay tuned. Larry says, this is solid info. Will the recording be available? I want to share with the CISO. Glad you feel that way, Larry. And yes, all of our webinars are recorded. You'll get a link to the recording. Let's see here. Tom says, can someone move the mouse cursor? So Tom, are you thinking about that in terms of in what context? Give me, I think I know where you're going, but go ahead and hit that. Give me a little more detail. Okay, so before I drill down more into this and the human presence aspect, let's just address a couple other things that come up, and that is, how do we prevent somebody from bypassing our privileged session management appliance for privileged accounts? So there's a couple ways to do this. For instance, with Windows, it's very easy to prevent any computer. Like really what I would like to do, Martin, is set it up so that the only systems that can RDP into the server are ones from my privileged session management cluster. You know what I'm saying?
That's how most people set it up. Absolutely, yeah.
So the way we could do that, for one way, is just with a Windows firewall policy defined through group policy, pushed out to the servers, that blocks RDP except for systems in our privileged session management cluster. Now, network logons are a little more difficult. That's this curved line coming around because, like, mapping a drive to a file server and getting into that file server for remote administration via computer management utilize the same ports. So we can't do that with a firewall policy, but we can do it with authentication silos. And so that's what you want to look at there for that purpose. Authentication silos, and that's something we've talked about in previous webinars, but it's that combined with protected users allows you to say that, first of all, if I'm a member of protected users, the only way you can log on to this computer is via Kerberos, and since it's going through Kerberos, then the domain controller gets an opportunity to check to see if your user account and your endpoint and that server are all part of the same silo. And that's how we could prevent, and so what we do then is take our privileged session management appliances, that whole cluster, and put them in the silo. And so now there's no way to bypass it, at least for Windows systems. All right, next.
So just actually, just one thing on there, Andy.
Okay.
It's not on the previous slide. So again, like to enforce PSM usage, probably the biggest thing is you don't give out the password. Security for obscurity. I mean, that way, if you don't know the password, you can't log on through any other mechanism other than the PSM product.
Right. Now, Jeremy asks, how would this be different from just setting up a simple RDP jump box with two-factor authentication? So, Jeremy, that solution offers a lot, but not all the things that this one does. So the problem with what you're describing there is that I am remote desktoping from my workstation that could be compromised to a jump server that has two-factor authentication, and then I'm RDPing from that into other systems. The problem is the password is known by the admin and is known by any malware running on that system, and that's what we're trying to prevent here, is complete password isolation. Okay, let's see here. So let's talk about this then. What if the workstation is compromised with malware and we're using this privileged session management solution? That's what I was getting at earlier. So let's say here I am, I'm Bob. I log on to my workstation using my everyday Bob account, Acme domain, and then I authenticate to my privileged session management server, either using my normal Acme Bob credentials or maybe a separate Acme Bob admin account. I'm not sure whether that's really even necessary. I'd like to hear from Martin on that later. Then from the privileged session management server, as a proxy, protocol level proxy, it opens up my RDP or SSH session down here to my server. Now, what if malware is on this computer? Can't it initiate and do that same thing? I mean, it's going to know any of the passwords that I've entered here at the workstation, and it can, like somebody else was saying, it can move my mouse around and stuff like that. That's where the human two-presence factor comes in. And I'm not talking about just a smart card on that workstation, which does not qualify as human presence. I'm talking about primarily it's usually an OTP or even easier is a push notification to a separate device. So now what would happen if the malware tries to do this, and it certainly could, initiate a session here to the PSM appliance, what's going to happen? The admin is going to get a human presence notification and that he did not or that she did not initiate. Let's see here. And there's other types of human presence, even answering a phone call and putting in a PIN, for instance. So then what really remains? The only foreseeable risks I can come up with is could the malware somehow hijack a session after the admin initiated it? And could it fake stuff in and out of that session? That'd be really, really hard to do with RDP, especially. Or what if the admin just approves an attacker-initiated session when it pops up on his smartphone. So those are the risks. Those are the only risks that I really can foresee from this scenario. Jeremy says, what if the workstation is the second factor push recipient? No, I've already said it can't be. That's the whole thing. It needs to be out of band. It needs to be a separate device. Now, let's go to the server, though, because like I said, this is mostly about the workstation, but hey, you know, at some point you have to RDP into a member server. If you don't use restricted admin mode, there's credentials there, and there's just no way of knowing for sure if other credential artifacts aren't created on that member server. So here, without requiring anything from the admin, without hoping and praying that they follow any particular procedures or policies, what if we just change the password on the privileged account at the end of every session? Now, I don't care what your credential artifact is. I don't care if it's, a hash, a cache credential, saved password. It just doesn't matter because we have obviated the password at that point. So that's the other key thing that we get with a good PAM PSM system. Now, one thing that comes up is people say, well, where does the red forest concept fit into this? All right, so the red forest is designed to protect your primarily your domain admin level accounts by isolating them in a separate forest. So you have two forests: the forest that is your actual production forest, where all the work is being done and the information is stored, but you don't keep any domain admin level accounts in that forest. You put those in a separate trusted forest. Now, red forest is technically effective in terms of security for the risks it was designed to address because it isolates those credentials. But it's expensive in terms of labor, additional systems, impact, and complexity. And it's, by impact, I mean its impact on how administrators do their work. Now, hey, if you want to use Red Forest, it's no problem. Martin is completely compatible with a PAM or PSM system, right?
Yep, yep. No, absolutely. And like you say, I mean, a lot of these things, there's obviously always new ways that have been built in where natively you can do some of these things through, better architecture design, sort of improvements to operating systems. But most organizations aren't the latest by any means. I mean, it's scary how many people out there are still running, ages-old unsupported equipment, sometimes for critical applications, which sort of fall into the, that it isn't broken, so let's not try to fix it or upgrade it bucket. So, it's really sort of having a methodology as opposed to something which is really sort of more of a platform-specific fix.
And it doesn't address, it addresses Windows and AD, but not all these other privileged accounts that we have. Let's see here. And it's not as comprehensive, but it's a heck of a lot of work. So when we're talking about privileged session management, we've talked about it being clean in that the password never hits the endpoint, is never revealed to the admin. The second requirement you'll remember was that it include human presence two-factor. The third requirement is that it's protocol level, and if it's protocol level, here's what we're talking about. The admin here keeps using the same tools he or she has always used. Nothing changes but the coordinates that you save in that tool for establishing the session. So here we have Bob user authenticating to the PSM session host, and then from there he's either using his Bob admin account to access this server, but he still doesn't know the password of his Bob admin account, or maybe the server doesn't allow that. Maybe the server, you need to log on to it as root or some other built-in account. So he checks that account out. But again, the password never goes back over here. What's happening is An RDP or secure shell session is being initiated to our PSM session host, and then it establishes a second session on the same protocol to the destination server. And it's acting a lot like a proxy server in a lot of ways, a web proxy, only it's just a difference in protocols. Instead of HTTP, it's RDP or secure shell. But in between here, in between when this session is initiated and before it initiates the session with the privileged account, it goes back through a push notification authentication service like Duo and asks that admin, hey, is this really you? And the admin, out of band or out of, on a separate channel, then says, yes, I am. I not only have the right password, but I also have this physical token, and I am here, and I'm pushing the button that says that I'm here and that, yes, I'm the one that initiated this. So that is what we're talking about, and that's what you guys have implemented with Power Broker. So I'm going to turn things over to you, Martin, so that you can give folks to actually show them an implementation of the requirements that I'm talking about.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and then that's the thing. It's like, the proof of all this, this pudding is definitely in the eating, because I think it's very easy to, to learn about these methodologies, but then there's always that, well, okay, what's the impact? What's the overall risk to my business in implementing it? What's the risk to my administrators pushing back against it? And so I think it's all about putting privileged account management in such a manner that it's easy to adopt. Now, hopefully you can see my my screen. What I'll do is just take you through just a couple of slides just to sort of give you a bit of a heads up in terms of what the solution actually does holistically. And then I'll actually show you, I'll go through a couple of use cases that just shows you how easy it is to use Session Manager from the admin side and also from the user experience side as well. So, what the products really is all about is around the rotation of credentials and giving users access to those said credentials. Now, as we saw earlier, the big thing when you're rotating credentials is now you reduce that the attack surface of when a credential is potentially used interactively. Or if somebody's logged onto a server, for example, and they've RDP'd from there onto somewhere else, then by rotating those credentials that the users actually used in the first place, now that means if they do become compromised, then they will likely be invalidated by that time anyway. Now it's really when we look at credential management, it's not just passwords. There's SSH keys. When passwords are being used, it's not just carbon-based life forms saying give me the ability to log on interactively. You got to think of applications and scripts. So, if we think of credential artifacts, a huge one are passwords that are hard-coded into PowerShell scripts. They could be in shell scripts, on a Unix, Linux system. They could be, I've seen them compiled into applications. So every time a password's changed, somebody has to recompile the application. I mean, so, it's all around a methodology to make sure that you have a process in place that regularly rotates the password. If they are released for whatever use case, then you make sure that they're rotated immediately afterwards, again to reduce that that attack area, and then making sure that everywhere where an account could be used, whether it's a Windows service, a scheduled task, an application, a script, you've got the ability to keep those running even though you're rotating those credentials. So session management is obviously the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about here, and that's the ability to use all of those aforementioned credentials to log you in. Now, we've been talking about, how easy it is and the benefits of, not exposing them in the first place. But there's also another benefit, and that's that you can record that activity. So, you can, be alerted, when users do certain things in sessions. You've got the ability to as an administrator, look over someone's shoulder. So let's say, for example, someone's accessed a system or they ran a particular application, that is, perhaps sensitive, something in your PCI environment. Maybe you want to have an email notification to say, yes, someone's gone in. Now you can look over their shoulder to see what's going on. So, there's a holistic side to session management. Obviously the big benefit is that there's no artifacts on the workstation, and it's easy for the user to log on because they don't know the credentials. But there's also another big benefit just in terms of what you can do with that data. So when we look at the way that it works, in this particular case, user's going to log onto a system. Now this is like the traditional web method I'm going to show you, and this is how a lot of other products work. I mean, they have a web interface. So, log on to password safe, and I say, right, I want access to this particular resource. So, typically I'd have a web page with a list of items. It then returns back a one-time session key. Now at this point, this is where we're different. So that one-time session key is sent down and then automatically used to log on to the proxy. You see, so that workstation's never logging on to the endpoint. There's no username, there's no password, there's no host name. All that's used is that session key to access the proxy. The proxy then says, okay, right, give me the password, it talks internally, and it then makes that inbound connection. So, everything that's happened, any artifacts that could be generated are actually secure on the inside of your network. So, there's nothing that can be compromised. Now, when we start looking at, the way in which, we can further enhance this for user experience, I'm actually going to show you, in terms of a live demo. So I'm not actually going to, it kind of steal my thunder at this point, but just, if you sort of look at the methodology here, this is really the key part is that we're not sending anything down to that desktop. Everything is actually retained on the inside. Now, the other thing that we can also do, as I mentioned, is the fact that we are sitting in the middle of that data stream, we can log everything that's going on. And it's not just mouse movements, it's not just, everything that, like a video recording of what the user did. But everything that the user clicked on, they left-clicked on this, they right-clicked on that, they opened this window, they opened this application, they clicked OK, they selected a drop-down, they selected this action. These are all absolutely key things because when you think about it, I mean, if you look at an SSA session, right, great, you can record standard in, standard out, which is what we do. We index all of that. That's pretty well everything that's going to happen. Now, on a Windows session, somebody's clicking on pictures. Unless you're using OCR, it's very difficult to actually see exactly what the user's clicking on. So what we do is we actually not only, sort of do the video recording and also what they're clicking on, but we even do things like we capture what they put in the paste buffer. So if I'm in an RDP session and I copy and paste something in, let's say, for example, if I wanted to hide something, what I could do is I could open up a command prompt window. I could drag it off the screen so it isn't being recorded, and then I could actually take a command and I could drag and drop it, and then, basically just in the little corner, I could do paste, hit enter, and, maybe execute a command. Now, we capture all of that as well. So everything that's in a paste buffer within an RDP session is captured. So, that's to say, it's great, we can record it, we can do the monitoring. The other thing as well is around control, because as soon as you actually put something in between the user and the resources, now you've got the ability to be able to say, okay, give me the context of how the user wants to use the system. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes when you look at session management systems, they'll have things like, say, date and time controls. A user can log on Monday to Friday. They can log on, say 9 to 7, some core hours. But what about emergencies? What about when that person then has to cover out of hours? Break glass. So something's gone down in the middle of the night. They have to cover it. They're working from different offices, different locations. So what we have with our adaptive workflow control is we look at the time of the day of the week. We actually have a built-in calendar as well. So you can actually say, here's my access policy from the 1st of October to the 30th of October. This is when users can access the system. I can also look at the, where they're logging in from, IP address range. Are they logging in from a corporate office? Are they logging in from a remote office? If it's a contractor or a remote vendor, Are they coming in from their office location, or is this coming in from somewhere else? So it allows you to add all that context in and ultimately give the users access to, what they need to do that fits that security policy. So I log in the middle of the night on Firecall, I got access to my Firecall accounts. Log in from the office during the day, I got access to everything else I would normally do. So the other thing as well is, we sort of talked about, access to operating systems and credentials, but as I mentioned just now, exposure and, risk to a business isn't just, somebody logging onto a server. It's what they can do, with that data. So for example, like say Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, I mean, corporate accounts that somebody could get in, they could compromise, and they could actually do a company a lot of damage. So what we have the ability to be able to do is, basically allow your user to log in securely using the same methodology into any application as well. So, that user's logged on from their desktop, but all of that credential handling is done on the inside. So whether we're logging vSphere, for example, and, using sort of ESX credentials, whether we're actually launching a Unix, Linux application, like executing that application, again, securely playing in the credentials so they're not seen, or even accessing oops, I'm going too further, even accessing a web page. Actually, I thought I had a slide for there, but I didn't. But, we can access, we have the ability to be able to play credentials into web pages. So it's all about, sort of making sure that any credential that a user uses to access a critical piece of resource isn't exposed in any way, shape, or form. So the other thing then is when we then start looking at, anomalies. So, the question came in earlier that said, okay, well, what if your system becomes compromised? So what we can also do is, we can start reporting on activity, because very often, right, to an extent, if you're not using two-factor, which really, you should be, but if you're not using two-factor and, yes, somebody has compromised your workstation that can move your mouse, and you've left your session logged in, it hasn't timed out, then yeah, somebody could actually log in, they could do things. But this is where reporting and anomaly detection comes into play. So we've got a full range of reports that allows you to be able to identify exactly what a user's doing, when they're doing it. We have the ability for you to be able to look at the risk of your environment. So, show me all of the, the privileged accounts in my environment whose password hasn't been changed, for the last 2 years, 30 days, a year. How many accounts do I have that haven't been logged onto? I mean, do I have stale accounts? I mean, if you think of all the accounts, thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of accounts you can have in an organization, how many of those are actively being used? I mean, I talk to a lot of customers, and, I wouldn't say that there's any one individual. Haven't even found any organization that said that, yeah, we absolutely know every single account that's being used, and we're absolutely sure that they're necessary, because everything's happening on the fly. Environments are very dynamic. So, again, I could be POCing a piece of software. I could install something. It needs a privileged account. Someone sets it up for me. They forget to take it down. Now, whether or not that's, somebody knows what the credentials, that's something that can potentially be compromised. So it's all around having the knowledge of the environment. So what our product does is it doesn't just allow you to be able to control the credentials, but it also scans for things that could potentially go wrong. Where are my weak spots? Where are my accounts and what's the status of them? And then when we start then looking at user behavior, where are the anomalies? I mean, do I have users that are potentially logging on doing different things? Right, they're using an account they normally use, but they're running different applications. Is it a different, time of day? I mean, is it somewhere where somebody's used a privileged account, they've logged on and they created a backdoor account, and then now all of a sudden that backdoor account, it hasn't been used before. So again, it's all around, heuristics, looking at patterns of behavior, and all of these in combination are, that this is the best practice of securing you. So ultimately, when we look at what we, believe what we make, we're very different. Is, you've got the adaptive workflow, you have scan capabilities to be able to figure out where you are. You can baseline your environment, all of your operating systems platforms, and again, regularly do that. It's, a complete data warehouse. I mean, all that data comes in, whether it's from our endpoint solution products and network solution products, password management, session management, vulnerability management. This all comes in. It can be mined. All the analytics capabilities are there. And the key thing is this is all available at the same cost. There's no extra charge. We're not charging for session management. We don't charge for APIs. We don't charge for SSH key management. We don't charge for privilege threat analytics. This is all in the products. And the reason we don't charge is, what's the point of giving out half a solution? It'd be like selling a car saying, well, you know, you've got 4 doors, but do you really want a back window? Well, of course you do. I mean, it wouldn't be a complete solution. But so you never want to put a situation out there where somebody could purchase part of the solution and then say, well, you know what, I don't have budget for this other bit, and then I'm going to put it in later on. And then all of a sudden they end up being compromised because they haven't put that extra piece in. So, you know, our philosophy is, you know, and we are unique in the space for doing this, is we include everything as part of the price. So as you can see, session management, live session monitoring, everything in here is available at no additional cost. Now, you know, it's great for me to sit here and say, yeah, we're the best. Of course I'm going to say that. It's my product. But at the same time, don't just take my word for it. You know, we actually did a very extensive evaluation with Forrester last year. Very long exercise, you know, took for 3 months, and, you know, they really do drill down onto the products, you know, Gartner as well, and they rate us very, very highly. You know, so obviously we're the highest in our space, and obviously we're very proud of that as a result. So as I say, it's not just a sort of anecdotal or looking at our marketing. You know, we've actually had some very knowledgeable people go right across the competitive landscape and test all these products. So what I want to do now is actually show you, you know, exactly what we're talking about here, because slides are all great, but you know, they're not that interesting. So, you know, this is a typical web interface. I mean, this is the interface of our product. You know, from an admin perspective, you know, I can go in, you know, and I've got the ability to go in, manage my assets, etc. Now, obviously, the end user experience for this type of tool is that an end user would go in and they might say, you know what, I want to log into an account on the system. So I can say, go in, open a RDP session, and I want to be able to sort of start a session. Now, the only problem is this is great, you know, and as I say, this is our web interface, and a lot of people will use this. But then you might get administrators that they say, well, you know what, I'm used to using, you know, Microsoft Remote Desktop Connection Manager or PuTTY or, you know, MobaXterm, and now I actually have to go for this tool. You know what, that's absolutely fine, because what we also have is the ability for you to be able to use those tools. So I'll give you a good example here. It's OpenPuTTY, actually. So if we look at the PuTTY, I've put a connection string. So this connection string is made up of my ID. So this is me, okay, my Active Directory account, domain WAC username. Here's the account that I want to access on a system called policy. Okay, so the admin 01 account on a Linux system called policy, and this is the address of my proxy. I'm sending it on 4422 as a definable port. So again, I've just got a connection string. Now if I open that, it's going to prompt me for my Active Directory credentials. So put that in. And what this is doing now is the proxy is going out, retrieving the credentials, and it's now logged me in. So if I do, who am I? I'm logged in as admin 01. From a user experience, nothing's changed to whatever I would normally do. All I've got is just a connection string I'm using to log in. Now as an admin, I could actually go in and I can see what that user's doing. Let's see, am I on the right one? I want to go on this one, yep. So I want to look at active sessions. I can actually see what the user's doing. So here's the PuTTY screen, so I can find it here. And whatever I type, as you can see, is being reflected there. Now, let's say, for example, that user's doing something nefarious. So, you know, as an admin, something's going on, or even though they're running a process, let's actually just sort of run a process here. So what I can do is, you know, I mean, with most session management systems out there, you've got the ability to terminate. So I can say, yep, okay, kill that. But you know what? It's an option that no one ever uses. It's great in a sales cycle. People say, oh yeah, you can terminate sessions. Nobody ever does it because nobody wants to be that guy that all of a sudden caused data corruption because he inadvertently thought that something was happening when it didn't. So what we have is the ability to log. So if I log this session, and come back to it, you say, your session's been logged, please contact your administrator. I can't go in, and again, I'm typing away, I can't do anything on this system. It's still running, it's the process is still running, I haven't killed anything, but I've stopped the user from doing anything worse. Now, obviously, if they're okay, I can unlock it, and then the user can go in, I can find it again, and then I can Control C, and I can come back to what I'm doing. But the key thing is here is that I have some control over it. So it's not just that user experience of being able to go in. It's ultimately what you can do as an organization. Now, as you can see, everything that is actually being typed is tracked. I can also search the output as well. So everything that came up on the screen, standard in and standard out, is also tracked. So I can search for any piece of text that user's seen. And again, I can put timestamps on it. I can search it and see find it. Now, bear in mind, this isn't actually just a recording. This is a live session. This is going on. So, I mean, a lot of session management products out there say, yeah, great, you can go in and you can actually, you can search on keystrokes. But you know what? That's you're searching on keystrokes of a recording that's already happened. They've already done the damage. So what we can do is, this is a live session that there's still going on, and you can still search the keystrokes that are there. So if a user is doing something, so if I type in the words total, for example, this allows me to be able to find all the areas. I can find all the sessions. So let's say your SIM, suddenly says, there's an anomaly. Somebody's ran this application or they've accessed this information. You can actually do a search across all active sessions and immediately find the active session that's there. You can hit the lock button. Okay, now you contain that damage, and then obviously you can figure out what's going on. Now, the other thing that we can also do is, obviously that's on the SSH side, but we can do exactly the same thing for Windows as well. So, in this particular use case, I use mobile extern because I can obviously use Windows and sort of Unix as well in the same tabs. But you'll see I got a connection string here. So my user, BT-Lab and Canard, plus admin01 plus SQL01, which is a box. So admin01 on box called SQL01. I'm using a plus sign because if you use the @ signs, a lot of IDP clients get a bit funny because they think you're talking about domain. So we can use an @ sign or a plus sign interchangeably. But bottom line is I log in, put in my credentials, and what this is doing is this is again logging me into the back end in exactly the same way as you saw with that SSH session. In fact, what I can also do is just for the hell of it, let me actually open up a session here. Okay, so this is actually going to look at an SSH session. So now I've got those. Now notice here that I also support full two-factor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Duo. So I just type the word push. Now you can't see it, so it's going to be one of those, imagine if you will, I'm just going to my phone, hit approve, put my thumb on it just to authenticate it. And then in a minute, there we go. See, I'm now logged in as admin01. So as a user, as an admin, I've got access to everything that I need in exactly the same way. I haven't had to any funky web interface. But as a corporate administrator, I've got the ability to go in and actually see everything that's going on. If we do a refresh, I can see the Windows session as well. If I want to see what's happening on here, everything, again, like you say, is audited. So if we pull up over extern, and let's say, oops, maybe minimize that down, and we'll just hit a few things. Everything that's happening here is being audited. I clicked on Start, I left-click on Internet Explorer, left-click on Server Manager. If I want to lock it, again, same sort of deal. I've locked the session. Please contact your administrator. You can change your PNG. So, this is all around, providing a tool that doesn't just do session management. Or doesn't just, give you a tool to remove the artifacts from your workstation. This is a tool that your administrators can use to very easily log on. It's an enabling tool. You're using the same tools you do at the moment. I'm logging you on. You don't need to find the password. You're not exposed to the password, so that means that ultimately it reduces a little bit of a liability of yourself if things do get compromised. But at the same time, the organization has the ability to be able to see everything that's going on. Now, as I mentioned, it's not just the ability to be able to to access sort of operating systems. We can also do the same thing with sessions. So think of a situation where you might launch an application like SQL Server Management Studio. A DBA needs to log on. They need to be able to add that stuff. Again, all of that information all of those things use potentially credentials that could be exposed. So this is really, the bulk of what we're talking about here. It's not just a solution that's, that's ease of use for the administrator, but it's the ease of use for the organization. Now you can actually get to see where all your critical accounts are. You can sort of scan your environment. You can sort of figure out, skip the right thing here. I can figure out where all my anomalies are. Through my analytics engine, I got the ability to go in. I can actually start looking at, where all of this sort of different, sort of issues are happening in my organization. Again, the same thing with when we're looking at the threat analytics. But this is something that really sort of helps everybody at the front end and the back end. So at this point, I know that we'll probably have a load of questions. We've got about 12 minutes left to go. So at this point, I'm going to put my slide onto the Q&A. This should actually, imagine if you will, this says poll. If you can bring the poll up, and then I can, we'll go to Q&A with Randy.
Yeah, we got quite a few good questions here, Martin. So let's, we've got about 20, so let's roll through them, all right?
Okay.
Okay, let's see here. First of all, Peter asks, do I need to install anything on the Windows server, like an agent, to support logging by the PSM that the user's doing?
No, it's agentless. So there's nothing on the desktop, and there's nothing on the server. It's purely, it's a network-based protocol proxy. We're basically sitting in the middle of that data stream.
Okay, now the next big one is fault tolerance. I have, I don't know, 3, 4, maybe 5 questions, and it's basically, what kind of Armageddon occurs if the PSM solution goes down?
Yeah, that's the age-old question. I mean, it's the catastrophic thing. Now, as with any enterprise solution, there are multiple levels of redundancy. So that can range from having multiple proxies, that again fully redundant. If one goes down, another one takes over. You might house them in different locations. So again, if you have a network outage is isolated to a particular region, you're not necessarily taking all regions down. We support the ability to be able to put proxies, for example, in the cloud. So for example, if all of your on-prem environment goes down, you may have some sort of cloud DR, that you would, sort of switch over to. So, I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer, because obviously that when it comes to DR, there's all sorts of catastrophic events, but, ultimately, for every potential issue, there is always a way of actually sort of putting some step in. Now, ultimately, and I hate to say this, but it's true, but even when you take all the technology out of the way, sometimes it actually even comes down to a password and a safe. Sometimes you even have to actually look at that level when you're looking at, disaster mitigation. Yeah, it's fully built in, all the redundancy.
Okay. Let's see here. Edward asks, how are remote admin sessions to the actual PSM server protected? And Edward, I'd like you to elucidate on that some, like what specific kind of risk are you addressing? Because we've got a bunch of other questions. So let's see here. P says, so the recording of clicking, can it detect any other record other than user-related action? Okay, I don't really understand that question. And let's see here. Oh, Edward would like to know, does Beyond Trust discover admin accounts? And, what is the onboarding process for admin accounts in general in Beyond Trust?
No, that's a great question, yeah. So, yeah, absolutely we do. So the product includes a scanner. You could use multiple scanners. I mean, again, it's all built into the license. And what that allows you to be able to do is, enumerate your environment, pull in all the accounts. It tells you, are the admin, when they last logged on to, when was the password last changed. It'll even actually enumerate all, depending on what scan level you do, it can even enumerate all the software that's on your, on your platforms, the services that are running, the processes that are running, anything that you need to know about that system. Now what you can then do, when that's pulled in, there is automation. So you might say, I've discovered a server. It's got a SQL server on there, and it's got an SA account that's unmanaged. Automatically manage it. Then send me an email to say that you've done it, and automatically give access to the DBA group. So, as I say, multiple different levels, but the service scanning is absolutely critical. But plus also we do integrate in with CMDBs. I mean, very often, especially when you're looking at cloud environments, people will bootstrap environments, we're using Ansible, Chef, etc., Puppet. And so, what we can do is we can tie in. So there's a full API integration as well. So, whether you actually want to, you have an existing build process that you want to integrate this into, or you want to scan the information in, all of those options are there.
Okay, and we got more questions coming in. We're like at 20 questions. Michael, in this scenario, second factor isn't used with the secure shell session. Is that not possible? No, you can do that, right?
Yeah, I did the second factor with the SSH session. That's why I did the push. So we fully support two-factor token push, whatever on the those.
Okay, Esteban wants to know, so the Putty app, is that running on the client machine or inside Power Broker?
No, the Putty, it's on the client machine. I mean, it's just an SSH client. I mean, you could use Terminal on a Mac. I mean, you could go to a Windows system. It doesn't matter. It's just any SSH client. It's
proxy. That's the beauty of a proxy.
Yeah.
Okay, Glenn says, in a company with 20,000 employees, around 300 admin, says you're not able to live connect to all connections and view these sessions. So is it possible to set up flags for cybersecurity personnel that here's something going on? Maybe you want to take a look at it. That's a great question, Glenn.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a great question, because, I mean, like you say, you can't see the wood for the trees. Yeah, I mean, we've got, organizations out there with like 40, 50 appliances, 3,000 concurrent sessions, and oftentimes you might be sending all your information directly to a SIM that's going to do an element of correlation, or you can actually add in, certain alerts. So, tell me when a user typed this command, send me an email, block this command, block the session if a user does this. So there's a lot of automatic mitigating steps, but you can also do alerting, and also, like I said, there's a threat analytics. Tell me when there's changes in behavior, something's different, now I can go in and investigate.
Guillermo asks, can you do the same thing for sessions using applications like Toad for database managers?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Toad is fully supported. It's built in. I mean, basically, the way to think of it, any Windows application, any Unix, Linux application, any website.
Tim wants to know, how is it licensed?
So it's actually licensed per managed asset. So, however, think of an asset as a bucket of accounts. So it could be a database with a set of local accounts, a local Windows system, a server, where you want a local administrator account, or it could be a domain or LDAP directory. So it's those are regarded as assets, and it's licensed by the number of assets. Everything you've seen there today is included in that price.
Noman asks, can the destination server be in the cloud, and are you showing in terms of proxying into, and you are showing in terms of proxying into server can still happen? You understand
I think I understand the question. Yeah. So we actually have cloud agents, so we can actually go. So basically, if you've got an on-prem environment, we can actually go out into like Azure, AWS, etc. We have connectors that will enumerate assets out there and pull them down in to be managed. And obviously, you connect over a VPN. We also have. We're one of the only vendors with native appliances actually available for AWS, Azure, like in the marketplaces. Google Clouds, Oracle Clouds coming soon. So we will natively run in the cloud environments, and we can also, allow you to be able to log on to those. Very standard use case.
Melissa says, by the way, that's very cool. Melissa says, how do you manage access control for scripts using privileged access accounts? That's a good one.
Yeah, so basically any script that actually needs to, you need to have an element of a run as, so, that a script has to run as something. So it's not a carbon-based live form, but it's what we call like an API user. Now, you would typically have an API key, which again you can rotate, that goes along with it. So that's, if you like, that other factor. And then you can have other multiple factors as well, like the MAC address and the, sort of checksum of the system. I mean, there's various ways in which you can authenticate that calling application. But yeah, I mean, for an RBAC perspective, even an application that's coming in has to run as a specific user, even if it's just an API one.
Guillermo asks, can you prevent admins from entering commands such as shutdown, even if logged in as root? And you touched on this, but let's hit it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we can do that. Obviously in Unix, Linux, as you know, I mean, there's many ways you can do it. So you can use aliases and you can rename things. We do actually have a product that is companion to this called Parabroke Unix Linux, which actually does have something called ACA, which will actually then start looking at what gets executed as opposed to what a user's typed to what they've renamed. So different levels of doing it, but yeah, absolutely. Under standard controls, we can block a user from doing it and we can alert you when it happens, but we can actually get down to almost to the level where it would be impossible for somebody to do it with these optional host-based clients.
Jeremy asks, how does it handle password changes?
So password changes are done natively. Unix, Linux via SSH. It's obviously Windows will go out natively. Now, one of the things that we do, which is again I think is a very unique thing, is we actually queue them all up. So all your password changes go into a central queue in the database. That means you can have any number of appliances all talking to it, and each one of those contains a password change component. So I don't have a system in data center A changing passwords in data center B. You have local change agents that are responsible for those areas, which allows you to be able to load balance. It allows you to be able to scale up. And we've tested changing millions of passwords in a very, very short space of time, just by adding on additional appliances onto that methodology.
Guillermo says, can you prevent RDP sessions leapfrogging from another system using RDP on the system that they've been allowed into? You understand what he's asking?
Yeah. I mean, so you can do that with there isn't a way within an RDP session currently of blocking a command. Most of the command blocking we do is on SSH with our connection profiles. You've got the ability to alert on that. Now what we do actually have, again, a companion product that goes with this, which is called Parabroker Windows, which is our least privilege for Windows. If that's something that you want to be able to block, that allows you to be able to essentially control what commands a user can actually run. It effectively removes your admin rights, and then what you're doing is you're running your applications as a specific user account. So different levels of granularity there, but ultimately it's all around that control and making sure that the user doesn't have the credentials in the first place to be able to log on to anywhere else, to leapfrog.
I think the other thing I want to point out, though, is if you're really doing PAM comprehensively, when they open up that RDP session, what credentials are they going to use to get into the next server,
That's exactly right. Yeah, exactly. No, you've always, because it's always going to prompt you. Now, it's not going to stop you from opening, to accessing network shares, through NTLM or whatever, but yeah, you're right. If you don't have the credentials, it's that whole security for obscurity thing, you can't get anywhere else.
Laith asks, can we have custom-built reports?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a really cool thing. So everything gets put into an OLAP data cube. You can slice and dice the data any way you like. You can create your own pivot reports. You can export them to Excel and even just run your reports directly from Excel. Just actually refresh it through a data connection to the database. Yeah, very, very powerful. But yeah, you can build any report you like, basically.
Can Powerbroker push logs to Splunk?
Yeah, we have a native Splunk connector.
All right. Clayton says, does it manage admin accounts as far as password rotation and or active state when not used?
So I'm not sure the question. Are they saying that do we maybe change it to disabled when it's not used, perhaps?
I'm not sure on that one either.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, when the password's been rotated, password safe is now the authority for that account. I mean, no one knows what it is. It's impossible to check out or get access to a credential without it being formally checked out of the system. So, I mean, either way, I mean, it's really not accessible.
Peter asks, does this support session management for just RDP and Secure Shell only? What about web portals or database management tools?
Yeah, so we actually support those through the application support. So the way that works is you would set up like an RDS host and you run them as a remote app. So for example, I'd run SQL Server Management Studio as a remote app. I mean, that's kind of a good example because I can play in the credentials for the command line and execute that as a user I want. But with a web page, you can use any macros. So typically we use like AutoIt scripts. We have a library of those that are supported. Where you basically would launch your application or your web page or whatever it happens to be, and would then play in those credentials.
That makes sense. Guillermo, where are the recordings stored? How big are they? What kind of encryption to prevent manipulation, etc.?
Yeah, so surprisingly small. So we only record movement. So it's not like it's a video file that you're recording all the time. If you left it all weekend, you would have just a few kilobytes of just the clock changing, maybe not even a kilobyte. So it's about 25 kilobytes per minute for SSH. Again, fully loaded session. And a standard RDP session is about 350 kilobytes a minute. It's really, really small. The files, they're not movie files. You can play them outside of the system for security because, you need accountability. And they're compressed 6 times and they're all AES 256 encrypted. So you can view any of that information if you got hold of the files.
Okay, got a long one here from Larry. Get ready. For fault tolerance, does the proxy server have the ability to maintain offline password save with mutually known offline encryption key? So we always have access to the last known password state. If all the proxies are not available, this is critical if the offline safe is the only way we can crack it, getting key from senior management to get to our networking devices by PM. A lack of definite answer, blah, blah, blah. Does that help?
I think I got the question. I mean, I think, so what it's looking for really are kind of DR options, in terms of making sure it's available, plus also, making sure that it can be decrypted. So we deliver this as an appliance. I mean, you can install the software, but I mean, the recommendation is, and I would say 99% of our customers buy it as either a virtual or physical appliance. Now, what that means is the encryption keys are, safely stored on every appliance that's out there. So for a redundancy perspective, if you go for a traditional active-passive model, then you could have a redundant appliance that's always being mirrored. We're using SQL high performance, sort of mirroring, which means that, if your primary appliance went down, you typically have a load balancer. It would detect, that it's gone down. It will switch you over to the secondary. Now, effectively that there's no loss. Everything's there, and they've got the ability to auto catch up. In a multi-active environment, you might have an external database, or indeed, you might even actually have, the ability to do it offline. So, it's a database. You have there are tools that automatically allow you to be able to back it up. We lock down the encryption keys. We fully support HSMs. Again, if you want to use third-party storage for your keys, but there's many different options, and we certainly have a lot of information and resources available, for different deployments.
Jeremy asked, clarifying the asset licensing. So you've got a Windows 2012 server also running SQL Server. Is that 2 or is that 1 asset?
That's 2. That's 2 only if you want to actually manage passwords on the local server and also in the database. So it's, it counts as an asset, if you want to manage credentials in it.
Do you have integrations for things like Commvault or other services?
Yeah, so but what we have is something we call a custom platform, which means anything with an SSH interface or even telnet if it comes to that, you can actually build your own connector. So we have, I mean, there's a lot of out of the box capability with just about every router, firewall, network device sort of combination you can think of. Many of those, you can obviously sort of look at the list on our website. But for anything that isn't there, you can basically build your own expect script. You don't have to go to us. You don't have to pull out professional services. It's a nice, easy to use visual way where you just say, yep, okay, it prompted me for this, and then now I put in this, and now it's prompted me for that. You just basically build up that script. So yeah, pretty well any SSH device is supported for password management.
Ashwin's got a number of comments. It says it looks like a really good solution. Can we send activity logs to Logarithm? You want to take that one first?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we have a Logarithm connector.
And how's the slices work? Okay, I think we already covered that one. Third question is sizing, documentation. He's wondering how much one appliance can support.
So, I mean, it's a subjective thing. So obviously, I'm going to talk in averages. Because it all depends on what you're doing, what you're storing, how often you're changing passwords. What are your users doing? I mean, are they, doing network administration? Are they playing Doom? I mean, we all have different bandwidth requirements. So, I mean, as a general rule, a single appliance on its own, the lower model would do about 30,000 accounts. The larger model would do 250,000. If you, move to a multi-active model with external database, we've got, customers out there with millions of accounts that are under management. As I say, the way it scales up in terms of proxies is each proxy, again, depending on what you're doing and the type of appliance, can go anywhere from 300 to 500 concurrent sessions. The more sessions you need, the more appliances you add, basically. It's very easy to scale.
Yeah, someone else is asking that. Okay, Lace says the keystroke is being captured before, after the enter. Can we prevent a command before executing the command? Do you understand what he's saying? I think he means like in a secure shell session. Command block.
So we can do command blocking. So basically, when you can put in a string, which could be like an IP address, a host name. It could be a glob or just any sort of very sort of simple regex. For the type of what they're going to be typing. And then what you can do is you can alert, you can block, you can lock, or you can block and lock, or terminate. So you have multiple options in terms of what you can do when you see those commands.
Malcolm asks, can you do anything with managing privileged service accounts?
Yeah, and privileged service accounts means different things to different people, so I'll give you both of them. So a privileged service account, in one sense, could be a set of accounts or in AD, for example, that people use to log on and do stuff, on your in your environment. So yeah, we do that. We also fully support dedicated account mapping. So if I have like a standard mCanard account and I've got an mCanard-A account in AD, which is my admin level account, we can also do something, and again, this is a unique thing for us for this product. We can do one-to-one mapping, and we can actually block any administrator from giving anyone access to my admin account, to my service account. Because here's the thing, if I have a namesake account in AD, there's the whole reason you're going to implement something like that is because you want to be able to look at the server logs or your SIM and say, yeah, like mCanard did that. Now, obviously, if an administrator has the ability to give somebody else rights to my managed account, it completely defeats the object because now, obviously, that I can prove it is, it wasn't me. So what we do is through the dedicated account mapping. Again, it's a 3-line smart rule. You put in your mask, and it will then automatically map every user to their admin account, and that's actually done by the system. It's not even a policy. Now, the other type of service account is where you may have Windows services, and using passwords to start those. So obviously we've support the rotating of local accounts and directory accounts, but then if you have a scheduled task or Windows service associated in, then we'll also restart those, change the logon as properties on those components as well.
Does it manage local admin accounts on servers too and report on password compliance? That comes from Lee.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. I mean, local accounts, directory accounts, routers, firewalls, cloud devices, you name it.
Jonathan says, can recorded sessions be run on a different, similar computer? Doesn't need to be similar, right?
No, and here's the reason. Because very often I get customers ask me this. They say, well, they'll put an enhancement request to say, well, I want to be able to export this this recording, as a MOV or a WAV file. Now, every time you export something, you now lose control. Now, within that recording could be personally identifiable information. You might have credit card information. You could, in healthcare, obviously, you could have sensitive, medical information for customers. And so, by giving the ability for you to be able to take that and run it somewhere else, obviously is a liability. So you have to use the system. Now, to your point, you can log on. It's a web interface, for the replay. So I can log on to any, system and view it, but I do actually have to be connected to the system or have accessibility to the system to be able to watch it because it's encrypted as well.
All right. Let's see here. Lee says some software still requires you to log on as a service account. We recycle the passwords manually when we do this, but can your system recycle and reconfigure the service to use the new password?
Run that by me again.
Okay, so yeah, there's some apps where, to go in and fix something or whatever, you have to log on interactively as the service account.
Right.
Which it's a real pain, but some apps are designed that way. So what they do right now is every time they do that, they go and change that password manually and reconfigure the service. So I think they're wondering if, what you can do to help in that kind of scenario.
Well, I mean, the thing is, anytime you're going and doing anything manually, you're exposing the credentials. Like, obviously, we got the ability for you to be able to say, yeah, give me a new random password, and you can then put it in manually. So we fully support that, but as I say, the best practice is to make sure that doesn't get exposed at all. But yeah, if things need to be done manually, we can give you the ability to say, yeah, give me a new random password, and then you just basically enter that in.
Well, and it's probably something you could talk to them in more detail on, because maybe you could make that a managed account that does allow them to log on, but then when the password's changed, it also has to be reconfigured on the service. So probably something to dig into on that one.
Yeah.
Martin asks, can the recordings be exported for any sort of evidence, like in a court case?
Yeah, well, that goes back to that thing where I was saying can. I do. It is on the roadmap to look at DRM. I've looked to sort of maybe we could actually look at exporting and creating like a one-time use. So it like a self-destructing video. The problem is, and again, this is something I didn't actually show in the demo, but we audit everything that is actually viewed, because very often people also automatically assume that it's only the administrators that are compromising data. It's not the admins. In a session management system, the reviewer can compromise information. They got access to watch recordings. And so, an admin could actually be going through and doing the stuff, but you might have a reviewer that would look at a recording and then use that information, even if it's, got passwords, but they might, be seeing credit card numbers. So,
hey, look, they could just run Camtasia.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but that's the thing. It's
how many court cases you're going to have to get a recording for?
Yeah, it's making sure you've got accountability and an audit trail for everything that's being done. That's the important thing.
Let's see here. Concurrent sessions. There's not a separate cost for the virtual appliance, right? It's just about the appliance, about the assets.
No, there is a cost for the appliance, because
it's a hardware appliance, yeah. Right.
Well, even the virtual as well, because it can still contains an operating system. A database has to be listened. think of it as a turnkey solution. So there's a nominal appliance cost, and then there's obviously the software cost, which is based on the number of assets. But that's basically that's what there is.
I see. And Malcolm says, if I'm managing several local accounts on a given server, I think we already talked about that. It's not the number of accounts, it's the number of managed assets, right? How many servers?
Yeah, I mean, so you could potentially have one domain and 10,000 managed accounts, and that would be one asset. It's all about, the collective container that those accounts are in that we're licensing on.
Woo, we're done. I think we got just about everybody's question answered. Thank you, everybody, for all your time and for sticking with us and for answering all those questions, Martin, and for making today's Real Training for Free possible.
Perfect.
All right, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks again, and keep those passwords isolated, eh, Martin?
Absolutely right. Bypass would say. Been a great session. Thanks, Randy.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.